Oh yeah?
A lot of these will have a screw slot, like that does.
Yeah.
But they'll also be square. This one adjusts your pressure you want it to cut out, and then that little screw in the back will adjust your differential. So let's say if you want it to shut off at 32 degrees and turn back on at 40 degrees, you would adjust this one until you got it to shut off at 32 degrees. And you could kind of set it for a temp. These are actually pretty close. On the scale, you wouldn't think so, because it's just a scale with a screw and a spring, but they're pretty close. So you would adjust this one until it shut off at 32 degrees, and then you adjust the differential for it to come up 8 more degrees and turn back on. So your adjustment and your differential spring. Okay. Yeah, well, it was back seated. Okay. So again, that's back seated. In other words, I screwed it out till it blocks off this port. If I turn it in, and with it back seated, these two communicate.
Mm-hmm.
If I turn it in and front seat it, okay, so that's front seated. Now this port's blocked off, so everything behind it can't get through, but these two can communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was going to recharge, that would be a good way to get refrigerant in there. That way I'm not pulling system refrigerant. I'm actually, from my cylinder, I'm putting refrigerant into it, straight into the compressor on the low side. But you have to do it as vapor.
So
Can't
just
send
a
liquid in
question. This is used to adjust it?
Well, it's not really an adjustment. It's just a valve.
Then what's this used for?
That's a cap.
Oh, okay.
If you want to put
On
vapors in the
Oh,
when you
okay.
charge it, then this is the way to go.
Gotcha.
With this closed, I can open this and nothing's going to come out. Well, yeah, it would. So I would have to back seat this. Come on. I'd back seat this. I had to think about that for a minute. And now I could take this off, because now this port's blocked off. Okay, so see, it's just a fitting for my hoses on my manifold gauge to hook to, and then a cap with a little rubber seal in it. These have a rubber, or usually do. There's usually an O-ring sitting right there that seals around the edge of where the threads start. So actually, I think what it is I'm short on refrigerant.
And the remaining refrigerant is on the ironwood.
Huh?
Is the remaining refrigerant on the ironwood then? Or just need to order some more so we can recharge the system.
This is 404. Yeah, so we use 414C, right? Which is, so it's a blended refrigerant, and it's actually an HFC refrigerant.
Is this supposed to say what kind you use here?
Yeah, and it used to say R12.
Ah.
And I don't know what happened to it, because I put a sticker on here. I think it was that right there, where it said 414. Can't remember what the old refrigerant was, but it changed to a newer one, which is an HFC. So, and that's the last thing that I probably should talk about too. So refrigerants went through a whole kind of growth process. In the beginning, they used things like water. Water's actually a refrigerant. It's like R718 or something like that. It's typically a secondary refrigerant. But in the beginning, they used water, ammonia, things like that. And then they started designing refrigerants that were called CFC refrigerants, chlorofluorocarbons. R12, prime example. Great refrigerant, bad for the environment. They found out that CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, when they got released into the atmosphere, the chlorine atom would break off and join with a water molecule. That's where they got acid rain, depleted the ozone layer, things like that, right? So
I thought you were about to say it was gonna start raining mustard gas.
no, but it's probably not. Well, yeah. Neither one of those would be good. So when they found out about CFCs, they started trying to find alternate refrigerants. They came up with blended refrigerants. Those are where, like R12, R22, those are all just single chemicals, right? So I can either put refrigerant in as a vapor or a liquid, doesn't matter. So I'm putting in the same ratio of what the chemical is, just one chemical, right? And when I charge and charge to the low side, I have to get it into the system as vapor, okay? When they came up with blended refrigerants, the problem was, like this. So you can notice on here there's an arrow, and it says this side up for use. Does it just say use?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, that's kind of weird. So that's not very much help. Normally they'll say this side up for vapor or liquid. It'll say one or the other. Now typically this valve is just screwed into the top. So in the middle I have liquid there, I have vapor on top. So with it sitting like this, if I connect my manifold gauge to it, I open the valve, I'm going to get vapor out. Okay. If I need liquid, I still connect everything like I need to connect it. I open the valve and I turn it upside down. And now there's liquid at the bottom, so I'm going to get liquid out. Right? 404, it's a blended refrigerant. So for blended refrigerants, there could be 2, 4, 6 different chemicals mixed together to make this refrigerant, right? So when they first started doing that, to get away from CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, they invented HCFCs, hydrochlorofluorocarbons. But just like with CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, that chlorine atom, HCFCs, hydrochloro, still had that chlorine atom, just not as much, right? So it was better, but it still really wasn't that great, right? In the past, if you had let's say back in the day where R12 was used a lot, right? And you still might see somewhere where you'll get a question on a refrigeration exam that says, in my condenser, if I suspect I have air trapped in there, what that's going to do is the air trapped in here is going to go to the top, so it's going to start pushing all my refrigerant down. And that means now instead of getting through all these coils, I'm only going to be down here. The rest up there is air and it won't let me up there, right? So there used to be what they called a purge valve on top. And if the technician was really bad and really didn't care whenever he was doing his maintenance, and he, instead of purging his lines out of air before opening the system up, before his refrigerant goes in, he's actually putting air in there. And if you keep doing that, it'll start building right here in the condenser. So what they used to do is, the symptoms told them that I probably have air trapped in my condenser. They would just blow off a couple of pounds of refrigerant out of the condenser to purge that air out. Bad. But back then, refrigerant was probably like 8 cents a pound, right? Yeah. Let's say for R12, it's 8 cents a pound, right? So the EPA stepped in and said, you guys can't be doing that anymore. And that's kind of where the whole EPA licensing came in, your certifications, was so that you could go, oh, I didn't know. And they go, well, you took the test that said you do know. So guess what? Now you get a fine if they caught you doing it, and you can go ahead and give us your certs back because you're not a technician anymore. So they were trying to curb that a lot, and it was a pretty hefty fine as well. So even though some systems still have a purge valve on them, nobody should be using that for purging. Okay, so then they came out with HCFCs, right? But still not as good as it could be. Now they have what they call HFC refrigerants, hydrofluorocarbons. The one we use mainly is called Hot Shot 2, and I think it's 414C or 417C, something like that. I haven't used it in a long time. But we probably need to recharge this, so I might be doing that next week. So if I do, I'll find out who's either on refrigeration or who wants to watch and see how you do this. Because it's really easy.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing though. Even if you guys know how to do it, you can't do it unless you have certifications.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
On ships, you can troubleshoot. You can do anything as long as you're not opening the system up to get that system back up and running. But you can't open the system up. And you can't. Technically, you probably shouldn't even be connecting manifold gauges to it. So if you can do anything without connecting anything to the system or opening anything up, go for it. You know, if it's an electrical problem, perfect. But if you got to start messing with refrigerant sides, you're going to get in trouble. So don't do it. But it's still good to know. So if you guys want to watch, I can show you.
Mm-hmm.
I could probably even let you guys do it as long as I'm monitoring you. So, but there's not really a lot to it. Once you see how you do it, it's easy.
Yeah.
Mainly with this system, systems have a sight glass like that. That's actually how I meter it in. I meter it until that goes full, and I call it good. It's good enough. If I want to be super accurate about it, I would use a recovery system, pull out what refrigerant's in there, and then actually weigh it in according to what the system says it's supposed to have. So that's two ways. So I can either fill it using a sight glass, I can evacuate it and refill it based on what they say it's supposed to have in it from the manufacturer. Or the third way is if you go and look at the compressors and stuff, it'll tell you what the system running amperage is. And if I take an ammeter, a clamp-on ammeter, and go around one of the connections on one of those legs, the harder this works, the more amperage it's going to pull. The more refrigerant I put in there, the harder this is going to work. So if I meter refrigerant until the amperage rises up to what the system says the amperage is supposed to be, that's another way to do it. But for me, sight glass method. It's the easiest. It's close enough to where it works. So that's usually what I do. You may hear something about a dial gauge. Nobody really uses those anymore. The dial gauges, what they used to do is they would charge to the high side with a liquid. So the dial gauge looked like a big cylinder with this weird looking graft in it. And you would put the refrigerant you need. Like if you needed 2 pounds, you'd fill it with 2 pounds of liquid. Inside there was a heating element, and you would plug it in so that it heated the refrigerant up, and it went in as a vapor, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least pressurized the liquid that pushed it, right? Here's the problem. Let's say on this system, when it's running. The high side's probably like 300 psi. Low side might be 20. Atmospheric pressure is 14. This with room heat on it might have a pressure of about 80. Would it be easier for me to put 80 psi worth of stuff in a 300 psi side or in a 20 psi side?
The 300 side one?
Huh?
The 300 side one?
No.
20.
Because this is 300 is going to be a higher pressure than this. It's going to go from the system into my bottle.
Oh, yeah.
But if this is 80, I can put it in a 20 psi side all day long, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a natural flow from high pressure to low. Okay. But here's the issue. So everything above CFCs, so HCFCs and HFCs are blended refrigerants, right? So that means I have multiple liquids in here that probably all have different saturation points. So they're going to vapor at different temperatures, right? If I try to take vapor off of here and put it into the system on the low side, if I'm just putting a pound in there, I don't know what of this refrigerant I'm getting in there. I'm getting a pound of something, but it's probably not the full mixture, right? So, how do you get around that? So like I said, nobody uses, I've never seen anybody use a dial-a gauge anymore, or a dial-a-charge. So what you do is, you get connected to it, turn it upside down so I have liquid coming out, right? But what I do is when I crack my manifold valve open to put refrigerant into here, I use my valve on the manifold like that metering device. So coming out of here, it comes out as a liquid. But as it passes through my manifold gauge and comes out the hose into here, it's vapor. And I'm getting the full mixture out of here. So if you're going to charge with a blended refrigerant, you have to come out as a liquid. Can't do it as a vapor.
Okay.
Don't worry about having to remember that, because you won't see that on a test. But it's just for like your own knowledge. All blended refrigerants, they have to come out of the bottle as a liquid. Any questions?